Higher Education. I'm Justin Fisk, Policy Associate for Federal and International Affairs at the Council of State Governments and the State International Development Organizations, and the webinar's host. During the panelist presentations, you will be in listen-only mode. At the end of the presentations, we will have a Q&A. You can type in questions in the Go-To meeting box on your screen at any time, and we'll get to as many questions as we have time for. The webinar audio and the slides will be posted on the CSG Knowledge Center, and as an attendee, we will send you the link to the audio and slides. Today we have 5 speakers. First, we have Dr. Jason Lane and Taya Owens from the State University of New York. Dr. Lane is Vice Provost for Academic Planning and Strategic Leadership at the State University of New York, Senior Fellow at the Nelson A. Rockefeller Institute of Government, and Co-Director of the Cross-Border Education Research Team. Ms. Owens is an Academic Affairs Associate at the State University of New York and a doctoral student at the University of Albany, where she focuses on comparative education policy with an emphasis on national higher education systems, organizational diversity, and performance outcomes. We also have Joanne Kenlian, who is Director of the U.S. Commercial Services Westchester Export Assistance Center located in White Plains, New York. The U.S. Commercial Service is a division of the U.S. Department of Commerce, a federal government agency dedicated to helping small to medium-sized companies develop international markets. Her office is part of an international network of global professionals with offices across the U.S. and over 70 countries. To wrap up the webinar, we'll have Wade Merritt and Lucy Somo from the Maine International Trade Center. Mr. Merritt is the Vice President of the organization. In this capacity, Mr. Merritt is responsible for supervising the staff and day-to-day operations of the center, including trade missions, technical assistance, and programming. In addition, he founded Study Maine. Ms. Somo is an international trade specialist at the Maine International Trade Center and has the primary responsibility for assisting Maine's education sector and is the coordinator of Study Maine. With that, I leave it to Dr. Lane and Ms. Owens to begin.
Great. Thanks, Justin. Appreciate the introduction, and good afternoon to everybody. We are delighted to be talking to you today about a topic that we're really excited about, and that's the possible intersection that exists between higher education internationalization efforts and state economic development interests. And this is largely based on a report that we published last summer from the Rockefeller Institute of Government, which is also labeled States Go Global. And it's available freely from the Rockefeller Institute website and will also be distributed to folks after this webinar. And I know that we are joined today by a host of individuals from, I think, both sectors here. We have folks who are from academia thinking about this issue from the university perspective, and folks who are from state government thinking from that perspective. And so as we talk today, we want to talk about the intersection between those two interests and where there are mutual benefits, I think, for folks both in academia as well as in state government. Next slide. We know, and there's a lot of talk about this intersection that exists between the academy and the economy. It's hard to listen to a governor's State of the State address without thinking about that intersection. They talk about it a lot. We know presidents talk about it a lot because they see it as an important way to leverage the public university in the interest of the state. And we know that community leaders certainly want to benefit from that intersection that exists between the economy and the academy. But for the most part, a lot of the attention in that intersection is focused at the domestic level. And we think there is a lot of opportunity, and through the research we've done already, identified pockets of opportunity for thinking about that intersection in a more international or global sphere. Next slide. So what you're going to hear today in the presentation that we're starting with really is thinking through where the benefits exist between these two, and we see it running in 2 directions. One is, in many places we see that college universities have benefited from or could benefit from direct and indirect support from their states in terms of internationalizing their curriculum and their efforts. And we also know that some states have been increasingly taking advantage of the opportunities to exist to capitalize on the global engagements of their academic institutions. And just to frame this out a moment before I turn to Taya, as we think about the international engagements of universities, we're thinking about it in a broad range of ways. We certainly think about international students who are coming here. We're thinking about the use of universities in creating a globally competitive workforce, which includes sending students abroad to better understand the cultures overseas. We're thinking about it from the faculty expertise who become area experts and develop contacts overseas. We're thinking about it from international research partnerships, where universities or systems of higher education might be partnering with their counterparts in other countries, developing important linkages that could be built upon for the entire state. And we're also thinking about the creation, increasingly, of foreign outposts that a number of our universities have in physical locations in foreign countries that could be capitalized on. For example, at the State University of New York alone, we have offices that are spread in Russia and Turkey, China, Mexico, and a campus in South Korea. So that's just to give a few framing remarks about where we're coming from at this intersection. I'll turn it over to Taya now to talk a little bit more about some of the facts.
Thank you, Jason. Next slide. So as Jason just noted and laid out for us, there are many benefits to international higher education, not the least of which are the academic benefits to learning in classrooms, and then also the innovations that come through cutting-edge research. But for the purpose of today, we'll focus on the economic benefits. To start us off, I want to recap some familiar statistics. These come from the NAFSA survey on economic impact, and we see that over the past decade, the trends have been fairly consistent. We're seeing steady year-over-year increases in the numbers of students that are choosing to come to the United States to complete their higher education learning, and that has resulted in the most recent year just under 900,000 international students came and studied in the United States. They're supporting about 340,000 jobs to the tune of about $27 billion being contributed to the U.S. economy in just last academic year. Next slide. We see these increases, especially if we look back a little bit further in time. Education, services, education and training has been one of the United States' leading service exports through the past 30 years. International trade in education is on the rise and has been consistently so. When we look at both exports and imports, we see that they've maintained healthy growth rates, and also we see that these growth rates stay even when we adjust for inflation. Next slide. So even though historically a lot of this activity has taken place at the local level, at campuses, with faculty really championing and driving program development, but as we see these synergies in between the economy and the academy become more global, state governments are beginning to play a larger and more supportive role. So in this recent survey that the Rockefeller research team completed last year, we looked across state governments and we saw a couple key facts that we want to talk about today. More university systems and state higher education agencies have been designating an international education officer among their senior leadership. This is an important development, and it's one that we will talk about in just a minute. We're also seeing increasing coordination in between higher education leaders and state economic development agencies. Next slide. When we focus in on this relationship in between higher education and economic development agencies, just under half of our survey respondents recognized that they are working toward increasing collaboration because there are common goals and objectives in between the two missions. About 79, almost 80% of our survey respondents agree that their higher education executive office supports international education and specifically collaborative efforts with the Economic Development Agency. Next slide. So specifically in the survey, we also collected data on different types of initiatives. Jason will discuss some of these in just a minute. But when we map out these internationalization efforts alongside foreign student enrollments and economic impact, it's clear that a correlation exists in between state-level initiatives and increased economic impact. Using data from 2012, we put up a couple of our examples on this slide. You can see, for example, that Maine has collectively identified 3 different types of initiatives that they are supporting through different state agencies. And we also note that there was a year-on-year 8% increase in foreign student enrollment from 2011 to 2012. That bears definite positive impact in terms of dollars that those foreign students are bringing into the state. And then conversely, we also note that states that responded to our surveys having no initiatives or no specific programs designated toward international higher ed also are showing very little growth and sometimes even decline in the number of students that are coming to their states. Next slide.
So what we want to leave you with today are just some specific examples of the types of arrangements, partnerships, cross-supporting initiatives that we've identified through the research. One of which is what are called the Study State Initiative. So Study New York, for example, or Study Maine, and we're going to hear more about that later from our colleagues in Maine at the end of the presentation. Some states actually support at the state level international exchanges and or study abroad opportunities through direct state support or system level support of such initiatives. A growing interest, there's a small number, but a growing area are these global alliances, so Global Michigan, Global Washington, for example, where they are attempting to bring together academia and industry and government to look at a particular area. For example, in Washington, it's the focus on health, and supporting a global outreach in the health arena so that they are capitalizing on their academic interests and their industrial and corporate expertise. One option is co-locating offices overseas. We know that states often have offices overseas to help facilitate trading. We know that universities are increasingly looking at creating their own outposts overseas. And there's an opportunity here, we think, for co-location of efforts, whether research labs and courses, joining with potential trade outreach centers. And then we think there is a lot of untapped expertise in the university and the academy in terms of really faculty assisting with their own expertise and their arrangements and their personal relationships in foreign countries and leveraging those potentially to help the state better understand and engage in overseas endeavors. Next slide. So as we think through how might we connect, we know that our senior international officers, state economic development executives, or their international counterparts are probably not often talking to each other, though we hope it's an increasing conversation because we do think there are important synergies there. You know, a first step really is identifying who that person is, either at the system level or the campus level, and then again at within the state in terms of who identifies and engages at the international level. Mapping particular initiatives or plans that might be worthwhile or interesting to a counterpart. Taking a step outside of each other's, I think, traditional safe zones where we are surrounded by those who we know, but learning about what the other's role is through publications or organizations or conferences that help support either the higher education side of this or the state side of this, and we have some resources in the next slide that talk about those. And I think it's always important to reach out in person. Phone calls are great, emails are great, but being able to set up an opportunity to go and talk to somebody in their office is fantastic. I know you all know this, but we just wanted to put it out there. Next slide. And this is the last slide, and it'll be shared with you all after the webinar, but we just wanted to provide an opportunity to give you some resources that we think might be helpful. And these are resources and organizations and reports that come from both the higher education side as well as the state economic development side. So that's what we have in a nutshell. We'll turn it over to, I think, Joan.
Great. Thank you, Jason. Thank you so much. As Justin mentioned, I'm Joan Canley. I'm director of the Westchester Export Assistance Center, and I'm going to talk a little bit about how the Department of Commerce helps and supports colleges and universities as they seek to increase their international enrollment. Thank you, Jason, for laying out some of the broad economic indicators. If I could go on to the next slide, just to tell you a little bit about ourselves. As I mentioned, the Department of Commerce has offices across the U.S. I trust that you all know your local office. If you don't, for some reason, please follow up with me afterwards, and I'm happy to put you in touch with the appropriate commercial service office. We also have offices in 70 countries overseas, and our mission is to promote the export of U.S. goods and services. And when it comes to education, we look at education as a very important service sector. I believe it's currently the 7th largest service sector export in the U.S. In certain areas, it can be the predominant export. For example, in certain rural communities, the colleges and universities are the primary employer. I believe in the state of New York, the SUNY system is now actually the largest employer in the state of New York. So it gives you an indication of the economic impact and why we at Commerce view it as such an important export that we'd like to help support and encourage. We look and are happy to work with a variety of different educational partners, from ESL through the high schools, boarding schools, up through community colleges, and of course the four-year research universities and graduate programs as well. Another, if we go on to the next slide. Another important reason that we're involved in this is, of course, their corollary benefits in the travel and tourism industry, the colleges and universities. When the students come to study in the U.S., of course, their families come as well. I encourage you all to look at the link that Jason provided at the end of the slide at the NAFTA economic impact reports that come out. They're state by state. They're very focused and very specific and can give you a lot of good information about what's going on right in your local community in terms of the economic impact. A few of the things that we see on the horizon and that we're trying to adjust and respond to: the growth of the study state consortiums, and that's something that Commerce has been involved with from the beginning, and we'll talk a little bit more in detail towards the end of my presentation and then as I hand over to Wade. Virtual recruitment, increasingly tight budgets for many institutions, and improving technology has encouraged us to look at new ways to help connect. And of course, the growing interest in agents and consultants as schools look to expand their outreach efforts. Let's go on to the next slide. Department of Commerce focuses its efforts in a couple of key areas: market intelligence, helping you, whether it's the state entities or the colleges and universities, identify your best prospects, areas that you should be focusing your efforts on, opportunities. Also helping you make contacts, whether that's in person, face-to-face, or virtually. And then ultimately meeting students. Our goal is really to help increase the number of international students studying in the U.S., and we do that through trade missions, fairs, and a variety of other activities. Next slide, please. Our website, export.gov/industry/education. I hope you've all been there. If not, please take a look at it. It includes links to our market research, our upcoming activities and events, and you have the opportunity, if you'd like, to register and then be notified every time one of our new pieces of market research comes out, or we're getting ready to recruit a new event. It's a great way to stay up to date. There's also a link on there to all the study state consortiums. Next slide. Just to talk briefly about some of the ways that we can help you in your states make contacts overseas. With our staff overseas on the ground, they can help identify potential partners, potential agents. In the educational setting, that could be, for example, if an international student recruitment staff member or even a faculty member are traveling overseas on a particular occasion with enough notice, usually a few weeks, our staff on the ground could help set up appointments for the university representative. We do this in lots of different industries as well, but in the educational sector, the way it works is we could, if it was your interest, set up appointments with the guidance counselors at the top high schools, for example, in Tokyo or Jakarta, whatever city you happen to be traveling to. Chances are there are a number of primary feeder schools, the international high schools, that will be sending the students to, potentially sending those students abroad, and we can set up appointments for you to meet with those staff, perhaps have the opportunity to meet with some students while you're there, help you build those bridges and make those connections. Additionally, if it's looking more for a joint partnership, you're looking for introductions at a university that might have complementary programs, or a institution where you might develop a partnership, again, our staff on the ground can help you make those contacts and make the most out of your time while you're there. One other interesting thing that we can do is, it's called, we call a single school or multi-school promotion. And for example, again, if you're traveling overseas and you'd like to hold a reception, our staff overseas can help coordinate that for you. It could be at the embassy if you wish, or at, they can help identify an appropriate hotel. Could be invite alumni, invite some of the local press, the key agents. We could help you build the type of press event or a public relations event that you would like in that market. And very often it is tapping into those alumni networks, looking at your building on the relationships you may have in that market to help then expand your ties there. And we're happy to work with you individually on that, as individual institutions or as consortiums. Next slide. And I think probably most of you are familiar with our missions. We do both sort of large-scale and smaller-scale missions. Most recently, we've been to in Asia, Manila, the Philippines, and Malaysia, Indonesia, and Vietnam. I led the mission to Brazil 2 years ago. We had a mission to Poland and the Czech Republic. We have an upcoming mission as well to Central America. We've been working very closely in the last few years with Education USA and helping to support and build on their fairs, and very often coordinate our missions in conjunction with their fairs. Next slide. While it's wonderful to travel overseas, and certainly that's a key part of what we do, we have also increasingly been using virtual technology. And one of the things we do, we call it our virtual education fairs, are an opportunity for U.S. schools to introduce themselves to agents overseas from their desk or their home. They can be done remotely. And the way it's set up is our offices overseas will identify and invite in the best agents or the appropriate partners in that particular market, bring them into the embassy. They'll have your materials ahead of time to review, and then be connected through a webinar just like this to 6 U.S. schools. And each will make a PowerPoint presentation, answer questions, and have the opportunity to meet with this group of pre-screened, high-quality agents while never leaving their office or even their home. It can be done in a variety of ways. So go on to the next slide, you'll just see a quick picture of a recent virtual education fair that we did in Chile. So as you see, they're gathered around a screen, and then the U.S. schools, depending, can either be doing it from their home computer or from their office. Next screen. These are just a few of the recent virtual fairs that we've had. We have upcoming ones this spring also with Western Europe. That's the UK, France, and Belgium, and Eastern Europe, Bulgaria, and Hungary. Next slide. And just to give you a quick snapshot of a couple other types of things that we're doing, we have pavilions, some of the important shows going on. That can be a great way to, when you attend, if perhaps this is a new market, you haven't been there before, it can be good to go as part of our pavilions or one of our groups. It helps make sure that you're making the most out of your time while you're there in country. Next slide. And then this is our current mission that we're recruiting to Central America. We're very excited about this, and in fact, we're coming in close to full recruitment. I think there's just a few more weeks, but this will be open. Next slide. As I mentioned, the Steady State Consortiums is an initiative that Commerce has been involved with from the beginning. Myself and my local counterparts in each of the states where the consortiums are have been very involved with this. It's been going on since about 1999, and there are approximately 30 state consortiums at the moment. Each is unique and reflective of the local market. I think there's very good cooperation between them. I know myself that I correspond and stay in touch with my colleagues who are working with their state consortiums, try and share best practices. But each one is a little different and is its own entity. Our hope is at some point that as more states join, we may be able to form a national consortium or a coalition. That would certainly be a wonderful goal for all of you that have traveled to NAFTA. You know that the other countries have these tremendous pavilions and make quite a coordinated and wonderful presentation. So our hope would be that at some point, as this builds up from the grassroots, from the states, that we may get there. Next slide. Just to give you a quick shot of what Study New York looks like. There, Study New York is approximately 70 at the moment public and private colleges and universities across the state. Our website is studynewyork.us. One thing just to flag for you is you may see lots of different entities out there that are calling themselves Study in New York or Study in your particular state. If you look at the URL that says .us, then you know it is an officially sanctioned state consortium. The .us names were reserved by the Department of Commerce a few years ago, and so have been turned over to the states when they officially create their website. So it's one way to look at it. If you see that .us extension, then you know that it's one of the official state consortiums. Next slide. Just a quick overview of some of the things that Study New York has been doing. Wade will talk more in depth about Maine's experience, but New York has been for the last few years going to ISEF, ARC, NASA. We've been also creating some opportunities for the membership to learn more about target markets. We held webinars with India, Colombia, and Thailand this past year. Next slide. And just start the Study New York booth at NASA. This year, New York will be there again. I know many other states are as well. And we're trying to get the states, state consortiums located together. I know NASA is holding some space so the states can try and be together. And then that space is also adjacent to Education USA. And I think that's a reflection of how we're trying to coordinate. And our relations are certainly improving and strengthening all the time. That the study states and the Department of Commerce booth will be near Education USA at NASA. Next slide. It's just my contact information. And with that, I'm happy to turn it over to Wade. Thank you so much.
Thanks, Joan. Boy, I'm always jealous when I hear from our friends in the larger states. I'm envious of the resources that are able to come to bear on those sorts of things. But I'm going to talk to you very briefly about what's going on here in Maine and what we're up to. We've been kind of at this with educational institutions for about 7 years now, and officially launched our Study Maine Consortium in 2010. Just thanks to my preceding speakers here, I will put in a little plug for the commercial service folks that we are very happy customers of commercial services overseas. They very much support our efforts when we travel abroad, and we've had fantastic success using pretty much all of the programs, I think, that Joan outlined. So again, I'm Wade Merritt. I'm the Vice President of the Maine International Trade Center. I'm also the immediate past president of SIDO, which is the consortium of state international trade development directors from across the country. I'll also make a pitch there for SIDO. I think Jason had mentioned that look, for our friends here in the education sector, look for, my counterparts. There's one in every state. We all, I think, do a pretty excellent job, and SIDO is a great gateway to that for being able to reach out to the international trade and economic development entities within your states. So I'm very lucky to find myself working and living in a state where we've got the political support for doing this international education. Just from reading through Jason and Taya's report, I guess that's not always the case, but we're pretty lucky here that we've got the political support for it, and we have a lot of very active institutions all around our state who are interested in going abroad. The mission of the Trade Center, my organization, is to grow the state's economy through increased exports, attracting new investments, and kind of a new thing for us, attracting new populations. The first question that we were often asked as we were getting into the education game was, why is the International Trade Office even interested in doing this sort of thing? The answer, and in fact, I even asked that question myself back in 2005, 2006 or so. And so we found ourselves in Japan with some folks from the embassy and had 4 educational institutions along with us. They said, look, you're Maine and you're small, but what you do have to sell is the fact that everybody wants to go there for vacation. So get them there to visit, and then get them to send their kids there to
study, and then maybe, just maybe, at some point you'll turn that over into some sort of an investment. So that's kind of where we're at and how we ended up getting here. Our export development efforts, it's evolved now since those early days in 2007. It's evolved now so that pretty much we can guarantee that we're going to have at least 2 or 3 educational institutions along with us whenever we do an overseas activity. And 2 or 3 may not sound a lot for some of my colleagues from larger states, but I will say that when we're doing a trade mission with 10 companies, or that we need 10 companies for 10 participants to make the budget go, knowing that you have 3 or 4, you may have as many as 4 in your pocket going in, means that we're able to do some interesting things and go to some markets that we may not try. We may not even try if we had to try to base this solely on a business delegation. So it's been good for the educational institutions, but it's also been very good for the business community. Our mission to Columbia in 2013 absolutely would not have gone if we had not had educational institutions on board. But it was a great success for the companies and for the schools that went as well. Next slide, please. We have a fairly small higher education population. We're at about 1,200 or so foreign students that are studying at the higher ed level. We rank somewhere in the mid-40s among the states year to year. Even on a per capita basis, we're relatively small. But where Maine excels is in the total number of foreign students that are studying at the secondary level. As a percentage of our total high school enrollment, Maine ranks 2nd in the country behind Vermont. And in fact, the New England states rank 1 through 6 due to a quirk in our education system known as the Town Academy. These are quasi-public high schools that serve as public high schools, but are classified by immigration as a private school, and therefore are able to take students for 4 years, whereas the typical public school is only able to take them for 1. Our economic impact is somewhere around $45 million for the higher ed students. We don't have a comparable study that exists for high school, but we're estimating it somewhere in the neighborhood of $30 million, which is pretty substantial. Again, we're a pretty small place, and that can make a huge difference. Beyond the numbers, we, of course, are very interested in that, but there are benefits to the schools and the domestic students that we have, especially in our rural communities where you'll find many of these private high schools. Diversification, we are the whitest state in the country, and so the fact that we can bring in students that don't look like the domestic kids is a huge thing for us. Diversification of our student bodies, improved academic programs and outcomes, and in a few cases, the very survival of the institution. We have a declining population. We're very much on the leading edge of the aging of America. I think our median age here in Maine just passed 40 years of age. Our workforce is aging rapidly, and so anything that we can do to think about bringing in younger populations is something that we're desperately trying to do. As I mentioned, these town academies especially tend to be in rural areas with even more rapidly declining populations than you'll find in the place where Lucy and I live in Portland in southern Maine. We're also working with our higher ed institutions to have them look at the high schools that are bringing in these kids as a pipeline with potential for crossover for higher ed. This would seem to be the low-hanging fruit for the higher ed institutions. And indeed, they are doing a bit of recruiting out of the international high schoolers that are in our state. We have one in our office right now who is actually from Korea. Her husband, boyfriend, I guess, studied at one of the high schools, made the transition to Maine Maritime Academy, went back to Korea, decided he liked Maine, and they've come back to study here. Next slide, please. So how does Study Maine work? Well, primarily we are acting as a marketing and promotion organizer for the consortium of schools. A lot of the other study state consortiums work on institutional capacity development, but we're pretty much focused on the marketing and promotion of the state and our educational institutions. Moving forward, we're going to be looking for these types of opportunities in professional development and capacity development. We've had some conversations with our colleagues in Massachusetts who do almost all capacity development to see if there's going to be anything that we might be able to do together. We'd certainly be open to talking to others as well. But we are, again, pretty much on marketing promotion and not so much on capacity development. But what we have seen in the context of our marketing efforts is that not all schools are created equal, and there are some who are experts in this field, and there are some that really need the help before they can even really think about effectively marketing their programs abroad. So moving forward, we'll be looking for capacity development opportunities, but retaining our focus on assisting schools in finding opportunities in attracting students from really we're thinking our sweet spot is stretch markets. Our schools, frankly, don't need a whole lot of help trying to get to China. They've all done it. Everybody knows how to do it. We're kind of looking more at places like Kazakhstan, where Lucy and I took the mission back in September, and we're looking at another one for the spring. Places that our schools think would make an interesting place, but maybe haven't wanted to try alone or haven't tried yet. Our consortium is funded through an annual membership fee of $650 through an in-kind contribution of staff time by myself and Lucy, and on a fee-for-service model for activities beyond basic, our web portal and our Facebook marketing campaigns. Next slide, please. Our primary outlets are our Facebook page, which is promoted by both advertising and Facebook ads as well as Google ads and targeted to demographics, and is now followed by over 40,000 individuals. We make posts regularly in multiple languages. Big kudos to Lucy for getting us off the ground with social media. I think this has been a very good success. Carrie, I'm seeing I have difficulties with the audio. Can anybody hear me?
Yes, we hear you.
Okay, good. Sorry, I had the thing coming up saying audio issue. Okay, so we're on our Facebook page with 40,000 individuals. We make our posts regularly in multiple languages. In addition, if we have an activity in a specific market, an effort is made to support that through the Facebook presence. And next, please. Our central portal being studymaine.net. It is not .us, but I assure you it is the official Study State Consortium for Maine. Central portal being studymaine.net, which is in its second iteration and features profiles of member schools and their programs, like everyone else's. In addition, we're providing information about Maine through a partnership with our State Office of Tourism, who's also a financial supporter. All of our high-level marketing pieces surround this portal and our Facebook page, including our multilingual print pieces, any advertising that we do. StudyMaine.net is pretty much on everything, including our own MITC literature, as well as our Invest in Maine, which is our foreign direct investment program as well. As Joan says, everybody's a little bit different. All these consortiums are a little different. Our idea here is to really sell the best asset that we have, which is our state, what Maine may seem to lack in amenities. We're not New York City after all. We try to make up for in things like safety and security because, again, we're not New York City, which is what many international parents are thinking of when they're thinking of the United States. And frankly, we're close enough to get there. Next slide, please. The major way in which we work with our schools, I mentioned before, is in our overseas trade missions, which we coordinate through the U.S. Department of Commerce. This is the promotional piece that we did for our trip to Almaty and Astana last September. We've done 2 education-only missions and 3 more multi-sectoral missions in which educational institutions have participated. We have held 6 large-scale events abroad with parents and students, which have attracted over 300 participants. We've done 200 matchmaking meetings held between schools and agents and or partner schools. And in one case, the missions and schedules have been coordinated by Commerce, as well as another partner, Education USA, which is a program of the Department of State. Our economic impact has been difficult to quantify, although our reported ROI is somewhere in the neighborhood of $2 million in first-year tuitions, but it's difficult at times to measure this. This is something that we do struggle with. That sometimes it takes years. Sometimes the results don't look like what you expect them to look like when you started out. We had a school that went to Korea with us a few years ago and met with a potential partner, which in some ways, I remember setting this up, was kind of a throw-in meeting. It really wasn't anything that was part of the main meeting schedule. It was something that came together fairly late. And 3 years later, they're bringing in 18 to 25 Koreans each summer for intensive English immersion. It was not what they expected in 2011 when they filled out the evaluation form, but I don't think anybody could argue that this has been a resounding success, even though it certainly didn't look like what they expected it to look like in 2011. Next slide, please. So our feeling, last one, our feeling is that Study Maine has been an unqualified success. There's a lot more that we would like to be able to do. Our biggest challenge has been finding funding sources to support and expand our activities beyond the bootstrap funding we've kind of been using. As I mentioned, we've identified capacity needs and training that we would like to do. We've had thoughts about trying to do focused efforts, a lot of stuff that Jason actually was talking about, focused efforts on specific programs. We met with the governor yesterday who would really like to see us do something around marine sciences. We're also trying to access our tourists for schools, our summer camps. And our big nut to crack actually is our state university. I know we've been talking about higher ed, but our state university system has been supportive but not generally active, and that's kind of left a big gap in our higher ed offerings. But they're also starting to reach the enrollment crisis that our high schools did that got them into the international game between 5 and 10 years ago. And I think they're finally getting to the point where we're starting to listen. So finally, the crossover potential with our other activities such as investment attraction and even trade development are enormous. We feel like we're just starting to scratch the surface. This has been a great initiative that we've launched, and we're excited about where we'll be heading in the future. Thank you.
Thank you to our speakers. We have about 15 minutes for some questions, and some were submitted on the GoToWebinar. So given the political instability we are seeing in regions worldwide, how much of an impact is political risk likely to have on international educational programs in the next few years? And this is for all panelists.
This is Jason. I guess I can jump in a little bit. It really depends on where you're at. And we've done a lot of work actually around the globe. I think we've visited something like 50 or 60 international branch campuses in about 16 countries, trying to get a handle on this exporting phenomenon of setting up shop overseas. It is so localized. I mean, you've got regions, even in the Middle East, Iran is going to be extremely precarious. But if you head over to, for example, Dubai or Qatar, a much more stable condition. So it's going to be fluid like anything. We watch what the Department of State comes out in terms of warnings. But it's, I think overall, even though we have some political instability in certain locations, that it is mostly stable and something that I think if you're going to do it for the long haul. I'll give you a couple of examples. We have a couple of offices in Russia. We've been in Russia since before the wall fell, early in the 1970s, and that partnership has gone through a lot of political turmoil, but has been over the long haul very stable, and I think it's very important for us and as well as the United States. And right now we've been initiating a new program in Lebanon. We're working with partners there. Part of it is we do feel it's important for us to be engaged in locations where there may be some instability, but where we can be an asset to them, as well as learn from them as a partner.
And I would just add, and this is Lucy, just that the schools in general are very open to going to places that a lot of companies wouldn't want to get into because there's too much risk. The schools will travel just about anywhere unless there's some major shift going on. So they're all over, and it takes a lot to convince them not to travel for recruiting. So.
All right, there's another point of clarification. What is the source of the data on the ranking of international education as a service sector export? I believe Joan noted it, that it ranks at 7th.
There's some data that comes out of Commerce. I can look at the particular source and send that to you, but as I recall, the last time I saw it, it was, as I said, one of the primary services exports.
Okay. And the data we found, I think, comes from U.S. Department of Commerce and the International Transaction Accounts was the database that we used to pull some of that data.
Okay, and then another question for all the panelists. Given the major emphasis on addressing the global workforce preparedness of U.S. college students, can any of the speakers address how any of these initiatives are supporting the education abroad, internships abroad, et cetera, as part of the economic development and impact aspects of states going global?
This is Jason. I'll go ahead and jump in and let my colleagues then fill in some of the blanks. It's a great question, actually, and I think where we see some of this is we do see some states who are looking to set specific goals for the number of students who are studying abroad. I think Texas has done that, and Georgia has done that. A couple of states we looked at in our report, where they realize that having this international experience is important, and that they are trying to set specific goals for achieving increasing the number of students to do so. Nationally, of course, the Institute for International Education is a big proponent of this. They run the Fulbright program as well as a whole host of other initiatives to get students studying abroad. They just launched Generation Study Abroad, which is seeking to double the number of students studying abroad in I think by 2020. And one thing I want to mention too, here in New York, initiative we started, which is called Startup New York, which is an initiative primarily to put tax-free zones on our college campuses. But the idea is to align economic interests with academic interests, so that we have partnership companies who come in and provide internship opportunities for students. One of the things we're looking at in the next iteration of that program is leveraging those new relationships to create internship opportunities for students overseas. So looking at who are companies who are in New York, either based here at the headquarters or have a significant presence, and then trying to figure out where they are overseas and seeing if they're willing to provide opportunities for their students in our students in the overseas marketplace.
Here in Maine, I would say we haven't the consortium hasn't necessarily touched the study abroad issue. I mean, we were certainly supportive of it. As I mentioned, we are kind of bootstrapping it here and are really kind of more in the export promotion business. But there are a lot of interesting things going on here. Jason just mentioned Generation Study Abroad. We have CIEE here in Portland, who is a pretty major organizer of study abroad experiences, who has just put a lot of money into this into study abroad initiatives. They've also been reaching out to public high schools and a couple of other NGOs here within the state to kind of push the Maine angle a little bit. We're hugely supportive of it. It just happens to be our organization isn't working directly on it, but there are plenty of others who are, and we're as supportive as we can on it, including having worked a few times with our University of Maine and Business School and a couple of other colleges when they've taken MBA tours overseas. And we're also looking at, kind of on the trade side, we do one large event each year on the export development side. But this year we're going to spend a lot of time talking about globalizing the state's workforce and what we need to do to get everybody kind of thinking in that direction. And we believe education is going to be a huge piece of that.
And I would also just add that in Maine, several of our schools specifically use the money that they get from tuition-paying international students to fund scholarships for local students to go abroad, generally targeting local students that otherwise would not go abroad for study or for short-term or for long-term study. So some of the schools, their strategy is to directly circle that money so that their local students are getting some access to study abroad.
And has there been any negative feedback seen in states where, through efforts like these, there's an increase in the emphasis and visibility on getting more international students? And if so, how has this been ameliorated?
You know, I would say it's hard to say. I mean, we of course, there have been articles about this, especially at the high school level, about this, you know, bringing in international students to, frankly, in some cases, help pay the bills in some of the rural communities, which is not what we like to see, honestly. And we don't do a whole lot with. We try to stay away from those particular projects, but there are. You know, you read the reader comments in the newspapers. Of course, it's some guy sitting in his basement, which is kind of funny since I'm sitting in my basement right now. But some guy sitting in his basement, you know, spouting off about how you've got Chinese kids coming in here. But for the most part, I would say that the support has been in the rural communities has been pretty good. I mean, I think a lot of them recognize that, as I said during my presentation, in some cases the schools may not even be there. In the local community, if it were not for these, you know, 40, 50, 60, in some cases up to 100 international students that are coming in and paying for tuition. So it's been okay. I mean, I think that there's been a lot of work that's had to been done, that has had to go on with academic staff, but also with the people in town to do intercultural training and say this is what it's going to be like when you have Chinese students coming in here that don't necessarily speak English or speak English well, or are very much in a strange place.
Yeah, I think what Wade has talked about in Maine is really descriptive of what's happening across the entire nation as we've looked at it, and it's so localized depending upon the state context or even the local context. There are states, of course, that push back against an increase in the number of international students, particularly if they see it as something that may be squeezing out in-state students. And, you know, there are examples of that out there in the media. I think in the sort of the post-recession era, as particularly in states where the economies have become squeezed, there's been more of an argument that there's an important investment in international students coming into the state. They bring not just new money to the campuses, and I think the point was accurate that that is a reality of today, although something we don't like to always talk about, but it certainly is a reality. But as well as new money into the state through the discretionary money they may bring into the community, but also the hopes that they might be at some point joining that community on a more long-term basis. So I think the best way to confront concerns around the increasing number of international students is to lay out what some of those benefits are, and a lot of it has been around the economic side. I think certainly the diversity side, the cultural competence side are extremely important arguments that may not always get the same weight as the economic side, but I think no less important. I think another piece of it is also making sure campuses have the necessary supports for those students to be successful. You know, it is a struggle for them as well when they come over. It's a foreign country, it's a new environment, and maybe an entirely new learning environment. And so I think there is an obligation from the campus to make sure those students have the necessary supports to ensure their success. And if they don't, those can create some bad stories as well.
Mm-hmm.
Jason, just to add on to what you're saying, one of the unexpected benefits I've seen in studying New York is the learning that takes place among the member institutions, and just as you're describing in terms of thinking about and learning from each other in terms of how to acclimate that new group of international students and how to prepare, and the student services piece of it is so important. And I think as any school looks to expand, they should, you know, of course, tap into their neighbors, their friends, and talk to others about how they've done it. And I think that's also one of the strengths of the consortium, not only recruiting international students and building that brand, as Wade's talking about, but just professional development among each other, which I've seen, which has been a really nice benefit as well.
And a question for Joan. How does the Commerce Department factor in the education abroad component into its economic development value model?
We focus just on the international students traveling to the U.S. For us, that's an export of services. That's foreign receivables. That's foreign currency paying for a U.S. service. So we just look at the international students traveling to the U.S. As we said, I'm certainly happy to, and some of the consortiums may work on the study abroad piece, but we at the Department of Commerce focus just on that international student recruitment piece. And the IIE numbers that we referenced that are in the NAFTA state economic impact data, that's just based on the Open Doors reports and the number of international students that the schools are reporting, and they calculate based on the number of students that each school is reporting their economic impact and in terms of tuition, room, and board. So those are the figures that we look at.
And I would say on that note with the NASFA, I think it actually underreports the economic impact.
Yes,
they don't use any multiplier effects. They only look at direct impact from what students are actually spending. And so I think those numbers underreport what the actual impact is for states.
Yes, as a parent of a college student, I know it's not just tuition, room, and board, so there's a little bit more that they spend.
And we have time for about one more question. Are there any ways that the federal government, states, and universities can work together to better attract foreign students? Is anything in the pipeline currently?
Well, this is Joan. I would say that our work at each of the state levels through each of the consortiums and trying to get the consortiums to coordinate more together. As I said, looking towards NAFTA in Boston, trying to get as many of the state consortiums together in a coordinated effort for that. I think in terms of what Commerce is trying to do, separate from the consortiums are these missions. We're trying to go to places where, as Wade said, whether it's Kazakhstan or we're looking at the countries in Central America, trying to help schools get to places they might not otherwise. So in terms of our horizon, what I see are the trade missions and continuing to try and support each state where they are and help those states hopefully ultimately build for a national consortium if we can.
This is Jason. I think Joan hit on a lot of them. I think one thing I will throw out just as an important caveat to everything that we're talking about, as our universities expand abroad, they are increasingly viewed as ambassadors of the country. And so to the extent that they are good actors overseas, they raise everybody's profile and help the U.S. grow its image. To the extent that they're bad actors overseas or provide bad experience for students here, they diminish our ability to attract students. So I think one thing is, we often think universities and colleges are competing with themselves, but as a country, what one does affects, I think, many in terms of the perception overseas. So it's important always to keep that in mind.
And that is all the time we have left. Thank you to our 5 panelists and everyone who attended the webinar. Also, a special thanks to Carrie Abner from the Council of State Governments and Catherine Bray from the State International Development Organizations for helping put this webinar together. Also, before we close, I would like to remind everyone of our next CSG webinar titled States to Watch in 2015 Transportation Funding on Tuesday, February 10th at 2 p.m. You can go to www.csg.org to register. And thank you again for joining us today, and thank you to our speakers. I hope everyone has a wonderful day.